Okay, so I guess I should start just by introducing who I am and why I'm worth listening to and having this opinion. So, as I've been introduced, I'm Erin. I'm the co-founder and creative director of Pet Biz Creatives, and we are an agency based in Australia that did originally start off as a kind of like anyone and everything digital marketing agency until through that experience we were working with all types of clients, and we ultimately realized that working with certain like industries just didn't make us happy. It didn't feel like inspiring, and it wasn't something we were passionate about. And we were like, so okay, so what is the thing we do feel passionate about? And that was our animals personally. And we were like, we've got all these skills, so why not just then identify it with the pet industry itself? So over this process and a lot of things we learned, we are now working in the pet industry and specifically email marketing, but we do also assist with brand development. So whilst we do have awareness of things like social media marketing and things like that, that's not our forte, that's not our expertise. It is more the email marketing side of things. But like with anything, they're all interconnected. So we do understand the importance of each moving part of running a business. So feel free to ask me questions about that, but I might not be the person. I might not be the actual pro to respond to things like those topics. But what I can talk to you about today is our signature methodology that we're actually in the process of writing a book about, just because we feel so passionate about it and we feel like it can be so useful essentially to pet businesses, whether you're e-commerce or service-based or whatever kind of niche you're in. So yeah, like obviously feel free to like flick questions in the chat, and Emily's gonna like jump in and interrupt me at any point if things need to be expanded upon or whatever. So to begin, just to introduce the methodology, it's 5 pillars essentially. And we call it the SINAP methodology because each pillar stands for something and it kind of spells out the word SINAP. So the pillars are story, identity, nurture, assets, and partnerships. And if you kind of look at the 5 pillars, you can kind of chunk them down into 3 stages almost, or 3 parts. The first part is really about kind of building the foundations of your brand. The second part is about then kind of connecting with your audience. And the third part is raising your profile. So you can see there's different interrelated parts to this. And I suppose before I do get into what each pillar means and how they work, yada, yada, it's important to realize that this isn't kind of like a once and done type of process either. It's something that is going to be with you for every stage of your journey, whether you've started and you're in the process of growth, whether you haven't even started and you're just considering it, or if you're kind of like 5 years down the line and you just need to kind of update and refresh your approach because the world is always evolving. But the whole point of actually following this methodology is I suppose, kind of like working with pet brands, we did find like there was just these common desires or questions they had, like, how do I organically attract more kind of customers? How do I deepen the relationship so I kind of stand out and I'm more memorable? How do I increase those sales? Like, how do I kind of know what to create and when, and what kind of content I need to be publishing and how frequently? These were the kind of things that we were encountering time and time again. And with our methodology, we do find like this at least gives it a bit of kind of structure and helps you to work towards those goals. So kind of, yeah, first and foremost, an introduction to SINAP as a methodology. I suppose, any major questions at this point? Probably not. Cool. So I'll probably just continue then. So one of the things that I really like, if you've gone on to like our social media at all, like one of the things that I really kind of harp on about is that the relationship between kind of pet businesses and your target customers is completely different than the kind of relationship any other industry has with their target audience. In that, if you're kind of like, I don't know, like a sports apparel brand, you have a very kind of clear, like, this is the product, these are the features, buy it because you need it, like running shoes or whatever. Whereas like as a pet business, the whole point is like it is such an emotive relationship that you're essentially engaging with this audience. Most of your target audiences are not going to be the kind who will just have like a throwaway relationship with the pet brands they purchase from, whether that's like the foods they're purchasing or like the harnesses they may be buying for their dogs or like the leads and things like that. It's not just a simple case of oh, I like the look of that, I'm going to purchase it. There's a much more kind of convoluted journey that a pet parent might go through with you on before they get to the point where they are willing to give you their money and they are willing to trust you with whatever kind of product or offering you are presenting to them. So it's really about understanding that your positioning within the market, it's not going to be enough to kind of like have a nice logo and a nice website necessarily without having these kind of 5 pillars in place for your business, because these are the things that are essentially going to be what nurture a pet parent on this journey to kind of know, like, and trust you, and to then kind of take that step ultimately with you, that they do want to trust you with their money, but they ultimately also do want to trust you with their pet. So I'm hoping that makes sense to people. Yeah or nay?
Some nodding heads.
Cool. So yeah, story is the first pillar that I mentioned. And the reason that I, like, myself and my co-founder, Taryn, we really wanted this to come at the first of the process is because without really having kind of your brand story kind of clear in your mind, it doesn't necessarily need to be something that is like set in stone, as I said earlier, because it's something that might evolve as you grow as a business. But this is the thing that is really going to help you to facilitate that connection with pet parents and foster that understanding, but also ultimately that confidence in you as a brand, that you're not just a, especially with like the booming pet ownership over the pandemic. I don't know if you've personally seen it, but loads of like pop-up pet brands just appearing because obviously it's quite a lucrative market all of a sudden. So, you know, there's all these people who are ultimately chancers who will be like, oh, I can make money out of this industry. So how do you distinguish yourself from those kind of brands? And this is a major way that you can ultimately do this. It's story. And again, it's something that it can ultimately help you to prevent from appearing kind of like generic or, you know, kind of unappealing or forgettable as a pet business having your story. So some of the questions to ask yourself, and what I'm going to talk about today, I'm not going to go too deeply into how to kind of do each pillar, but I just want to kind of give you an idea of what each pillar includes, just so you can kind of understand and start to see how it works. So for story, some of the questions you'd need to ask yourself to really start to develop this for your brand is, why do you exist to begin with? What's the point of your business? Especially if you're similar to other brands that exist within this particular niche, or you find there's a lot of competitors. What's the point of you? Like, you know, what are you bringing to the table that is different from all these other pet businesses? Where does your dream lead? Like, what is that bigger goal, big vision? What does your brand stand for? Like, what are your values? What are your ethics? What's your ethos? How did you get where you are today? People love to know kind of about the journey of how you got to this point. Who is the person behind the biz? And I know this can be a little bit controversial because people don't like putting themselves in front of the internet or having themselves visible as part of their brand. But again, this is something that is so important because it's something that is ultimately going to be, people are able to connect with a human. If it's just a faceless brand and you've got like paw prints everywhere and you've got pictures of dogs, that's lovely, but you need that human element in order to be able to foster that emotional connection. So who is the person behind the business?
And people like will be attracted to that energy. And like Susie actually was saying that she'd gone on a photographer's website and couldn't find anything about them, their name, like who they were. And nobody wants to work with somebody faceless. Like nobody wants to work with somebody who's just a website. Like I think a huge part of your brand has to be you in some way, for sure.
Yeah, especially because, as I said before, it's like if you see kind of a future for your business and where you feel like you're really going to make like an impact with this audience, they're not going to be able to resonate with a faceless business. Like, you might be the best in the world, but if like there's that wall between you and your audience, they're always going to like either consciously or subconsciously feel that. So it is important, and it's something that you have to kind of commit to, not the fact that you have to splash all of yourself across your business, because nobody does that. You can pick and choose parts of yourself, but you do need to have some kind of personal human element to your brand.
I was going to just ask Erin, I mean, I know the answer for me, and I'm pretty sure I know your answer, but just for everybody.
Yeah, sure.
How, because, you know, I think people are a little bit afraid of showing a kind of authentic version of themselves, or, you know, especially coming from an Instagram background, you want to put out this kind of quite perfect presentation that you have all your shit together and, you know, like you are the world's best photographer, whatever. How important do you think it is in terms of building trust and building your story? Is it to maybe not like hide the whole, like not to put you, like you said, you can't put your whole self out there, but to not necessarily pick and choose just the really good stuff or the really perfect stuff or the stuff you think that people are wanting to see, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know about you, but I do become quite suspicious of people who seem to have like the picture perfect life on Instagram, or the businesses where like everything is just like polished to the nth degree. Like, that's not realistic. That's not being transparent with your audience. And as you said before, Emily, it's not being authentic with your audience. And, you know, like we were working with a client the other day and we kind of produced an email and we sent it out and we were like, oh dear, afterwards we made a mistake. There was some bit of information that was slightly incorrect. Like, it wasn't like world shattering or anything like that. But what we did afterwards is we sent like a, oops, I made a mistake type email. And obviously it's not the same as Instagram, but, you know, having that kind of like that transparency of communication, we like actually that email got like a lot of sales for that client. And, you know, because people respect being transparent and honest and, you know, kind of owning up to, you are imperfect, you do make mistakes, things don't always go as smoothly as you want them to in life. Like, that's the thing that kind of maybe gets greater visibility even on things like Instagram or social media, having kind of like, oh, this was like a really bad photo shoot, but let's laugh about it, let's laugh at ourselves. Like, it's inclusive, it's bringing people into a relationship and, you know, building that rapport with them. Because how can you build a relationship which is with something that is just so pristine and squeaky clean, if that makes sense? I don't think it's possible personally.
And even vulnerability, like I found some of my very, very best posts on Instagram are the ones where I'm like, guys, I am struggling, everything sucks, I'm having a really hard time in my business, all of this stuff is going wrong, and people are like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing, this means so much, that I'm not in the same boat, I'm not alone with this. Obviously my business is a bit different than as just a pet photographer, you know, I've got the multiple, but, you know, like you could talk about a challenging photo shoot and how, you know, that was feeling, and people want to connect with people and they can't do that if you don't open up to people, I think, from my experience on social media and with clients and with people and stuff. So
absolutely. And I think it kind of ties into the last element of story that I just wanted to touch on. It's like, how are you making an impact, or potentially like what maybe giving back aspect you have to your business? Because another thing that people do really resonate with in terms of the pet parent audience is like seeing that you have a greater purpose beyond just selling your product or service. Like, it doesn't even need to be like a huge, like massive, like mammoth check that you're handing over to like a pet charity or everything like every year. It can be just very small contributions. But the fact that, you know, like they can see that you've got these values or you have this desire to kind of better the world in some degree, especially if it's related to kind of what you're offering as a business. Like, I don't know, maybe for every photo shoot you did, you kind of like contributed to the training of guide dogs or something, you know.
even just photo shoots for shelter dogs.
Yeah, like it could take so many
Handful.
different forms for sure. But, you know, kind of seeing that you as a business care beyond just making that transaction and getting that sale is going to like go like do wonders in terms of like building that trust and that authenticity to your brand. So that is just a big part of what we think, kind of like in terms of your brand story and understanding who you are and what you're here to achieve and what you stand for and what you represent as a brand. Even if your service isn't necessarily like, you know, like mind-blowing, completely different from what people have seen in the industry before, perhaps it is just the same what other businesses are doing, but this is going to be a key factor in terms of like distinguishing you in particular. And it might kind of like push certain people away, but it's also going to draw a lot of people in, because they're going to be like, oh man, I completely get that value. I love what they're doing. I love that they're contributing to this charity. Oh, kind of like maybe they lost like a pet in their past, and this just made them kind of like really cherish the relationship between a pet and an owner, and that's what brought them to today. You know, those kind of like little details are just what makes you kind of unique and makes you stand out in the industry. So it's not something, like I said, that you're going to be able to just smash out the park like overnight and be like, bish bash bosh, done. It's something that you might have to kind of do like a first draft, a second draft, and continue to refine over a long period. But, you know, kind of the sooner you get these elements in place, the sooner this will then kind of have a ripple effect throughout kind of like all your branding, all your marketing, etc., etc.
Lisa
So that's
said,
story.
Lisa said, a light bulb just went off in my head. I bought art from a woman who pledged to plant a tree for every piece she sold. And, you know, that kind of sealed the deal for me as a consumer. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
I like as well what you said, like that, okay, some people, you know, you doing XYZ for your story, or how you put yourself out there, or what you give back might push people away, but it's going to draw the people who appreciate what you do more. And I found that more and more and more, the more that I've been like, hey, this is the chaotic energy that you're here for. If you like it, you can come and join us. And if you don't, see you later. And the more I've done that, the more I've like had people who appreciate that come in. And, you know, like you get those people who want to work with you when you put out what you want to get back, I guess, in a way as well.
You know, because there's so many pet brands that just generally don't stand for anything. It might be quite a harsh assessment, but you know, like that's what makes them forgettable at the end of the day. You're like, I can't even remember the name of them, or like what their branding was like or anything, because it's like they didn't stand for anything. You've got to stand for something at the end of the day if you do want that longevity to your business. And I think it is part of like having the confidence to do that, because sometimes it can make you again feel a bit vulnerable to be like, I don't want to be divisive. I'm a little bit of a people pleaser. I don't want to like push certain people away. I want to have as wide a customer catchment as I can. But you know, that's the thing that are people gonna like gloss over you for, if that you don't have that strength of your story to your DNA.
You won't.
So yeah,
it's impossible. Just give up on pleasing everybody and just do what you like doing.
Yeah. So yeah, I will obviously I'll move on to the second pillar. So that's identity, and identity is kind of like an extension of story, because the reason that I do encourage pet brands to work on their story first is then because your identity is pretty much a representation of your story, and it stems from all the things that you've, you know, kind of developed in your brand story itself. That's then how do you visually represent this to the world? How can you make it like palpable and tangible to your audience? And I think it's so important that you understand your story, because if you kind of rush into setting up your business, the first thing that usually pet brands do, or any brand for that matter, is they'll be like, okay, just get a logo sorted, get my business name sorted, get the website up and running. And there's nothing wrong with that. But often once you've found like you've done this development on yourself and your brand story, you can be like, okay, then my logo might need to change, my typography might need to change, my colors don't fit this story that I'm actually trying to communicate to my audience. Because I don't know, maybe your story is quite emotional and quite pensive and quite touching, and then you've got all these bubblegum candy colors on your website, and there's like this discordance. So just for the cohesiveness of your brand identity, do work on your brand story first. But that's not to say that what you have at the moment, if you have developed things, is incorrect. It just might mean that it now like evolves as a result of the work you do. And one thing I do say with kind of nailing your brand identity is like the 3 C's, I like to call it. So it's being clear, consistent, and compelling. So it's not necessarily, again, something that you're going to achieve overnight, because it's like your brand's always evolving. But yeah, clear, consistent, and compelling is the main 3 objectives in your brand identity. And the kind of questions you need to ask around this pillar is very much kind of now thinking about how is your customer going to interact with your brand. So thinking about who that customer is and what journey do you take them on, essentially. How do you help them? What are their kind of emotions? What are their thoughts at the point that you meet them at? Like, what wants or desires do they have? How then do you help them kind of achieve those goals, or kind of help them solve a problem or provide a solution? And what is the outcome of that? And largely from that, you can then kind of identify what themes you're going to follow in your identity. So are you going to be someone who's very much kind of like an adventurous type of photographer? So you're going to be very adventurous in your themes and how you represent your brand? Or is it going to be more of like a warm and homely feeling? Like, is that then going to impact your color palette and typography and things like that? And then leading on from that is like, what kind of characteristics in your brand identity do you really want to highlight? Do you want to make your kind of your brand personality quite fun and quirky, or do you want it to be very kind of like intellectual and knowledgeable? Like, you can see where I'm going is like, you can have different kind of personality elements within your brand identity, but I'd probably recommend leading with like one or two dominant traits, and they might be kind of reflective of you as a photographer, because it is such a personal relationship between the service that you're providing and your business. It might be better to think of like, what are kind of the dominant characteristics of yourself that you feel would translate naturally and again authentically into your brand? And your style, or ultimately how do you present yourself? Like, are you going to be quite serious and white space and, you know, kind of like serif font? Are you going to be like softer and more colorful and sans serif font? You know, kind of all of these details interwork and interlock together to create an ultimate overall impression. So I'm hoping that all makes sense. Cool. So that's identity. It's a little bit shorter than story because it's more about that visual representation of your story. But as I said before, it's kind of linking into part one of the methodology, which is story and identity, essentially, which is about building your brand. So that will give you a lot of homework to get going with, I think, in the beginning stages, at least.
But I do think it's like really important, like what you said, that it's not, you don't have to do it now and set it and that is how it is forever. Like you can, I think my photography website's been through about 3 variations of kind of color, theme, and feeling. It went from being really gray and moody and like very somber and like, this is the emotional photographer, you know, like, to being not light and bright, but like lighter and kind of focusing more on what I kind of want to focus on. So it can change as like, so don't feel like I haven't got the perfect colors right now, I can't do anything.
Yeah.
Just pick some colors for now,
Yeah.
that feel like they work, and then you can evolve that.
There's a really cool tool that I use when kind of helping clients to develop their branding, and it's like the Adobe color wheel or something like that it's called. And essentially what you can do is you can type in like trees or something, and then it will give you like loads of different color palettes that are kind of based on images and pick out the shades of like trees and the different like greens and browns and things like that. So like there's been many a time where I've like literally typed in like the word dog just to see what kind of color palettes come up, and some have been very like colorful and color poppy and that kind of thing, and others have been more like browns and earthy tones. But it just kind of gives you maybe something to work off, and it just gives you kind of a platform to work from, especially if you're like, I have no idea what colors work together or anything like that or are complementary. So I think it's something like Adobe.
Yeah, I think I found it. I'm just going to
Color
put
tool.
it in there. There's
Thank
also
you.
as well my favorite one that I think I showed last time we did a branding, where it's like you can like hit spacebar and it just keeps generating like a bunch of different colors, and then you can lock them in, and it's so much fun and it's great and it's so colorful. But you can also like then start mixing and matching colors, and it's quite a good one that I quite like, which is like coolers.co. I'll also put in the chat. There you go, guys. Enjoy.
Perfect. Thank you for grabbing that link for me. And yeah, like I suppose one thing I want to say, because I just saw a comment from Susie pop up saying it's like there's a lot to think about. And again, I don't want like people to come away from this feeling like overwhelmed or being like, oh my God, like there's so much to do, so much to work. It's like I've said, it's something that is going to take, again, not to scare you, but it will take like months to work on and develop and refine. But it's something that is like, it's such a fun process at the same time. I don't want it to feel kind of like all kind of like do or die, kind of like really intense. It's something that is like, this is your brand, this is what you can make yours. And like going through these pillars is something that is kind of like, it's the best part of having your own business, because you can mold and you can play around with things and you can test different things and see if they land well with your audience. So it's not something, like I say, that you have to get right and get done completely the first time. It's something that, you know, can take months or years. So just don't feel too overwhelmed there. So the third pillar I want to talk about is nurture, and this is more thinking about your audience now, less about yourself, because we're all quite narcissistic in a way, aren't we? We love thinking about our own brand and stuff like that. But now is thinking about more so kind of like your business's relationship with your customer, because in identity you've started to think more about how you're positioning your business in relation to your customer in terms of what the journey you're taking them on is. And nurture is now about really kind of thinking about the strategies of that journey, I guess. And it's more about kind of like thinking about converting the customer is like dating. And I think a couple of businesses think it's like as simple as maybe kind of doing some social media ads or like Google ads, keyword targeting, and then they'll just convert, they'll just get sales, and they're like, I just don't understand why this isn't happening. And it's like, yeah, because it takes time. It takes time for, especially like I said earlier, it takes time for like pet parents to trust you as a brand, especially with something as significant as personal as what you're potentially offering your audience. It's not something that is going to be like a throwaway decision, or like, oh yeah, I'll just spend like 20 quid on that and give it a go. It's not kind of like a flippant decision like that. That's why we talk about nurture, because it is, you're building that rapport and that relationship, and you're building that loyalty, which will then equate into sales. So kind of like, you might have seen a theme that I like the 3 C's of identity in terms of being clear, consistent, and compelling. Well, nurture has the 3 R's, and that is resonance, relevance, and relatability. So to begin with, resonance, that's more kind of about understanding what emotionally drives your audience, what those kind of like key desires or worries or concerns are like deep inside. And it might be directly related to your product or offering, or it might be something that goes a little bit deeper. You know, for example, we've got a client who does kind of disposable potty pads, and, you know, kind of like the desire might be like, I want to toilet train my dog. But then the worry might be like, I need to care for my dog's health and well-being. I don't want him to become ill from being like, you know, unable to toilet train properly, or like stressed by it and things like that. So, you know, there's those surface level desires or worries, but then you can go a little bit deeper than that. So that's what I'm talking about, like with how can you resonate with your audience, and that's through deeply understanding what those kind of those fears or desires actually are. So that's really resonance. And then just talking to those, obviously, kind of like in how you position your brand in terms of like your website copy and social media, stuff like that. But we'll go more into that in the next pillar. And then there's relevance, and that's kind of, it's more kind of how do you make yourself, does what it says on the tin, how do you make yourself relevant to your audience? And the way that you do this, I've kind of personally narrowed it down into like, especially if you're at the stage where you're just increasing the awareness around your brand and you're just catching that initial attention, how do you make your brand seem relevant to what they want or need? And that is typically through offering them 4 types of value. And the 4 types of value are functional, financial, social, and psychological. So I won't go into these too deeply now, but like for just give you an overview, functional is you're solving a problem. So it might be like a how-to guide, or, you know, kind of like a checklist or something like that. Financial is financial incentives. It might be discounts, free gifts, offers, that kind of thing. And then social and psychological are kind of a little bit different, in that social kind of makes people feel like a part of a group, like included, connected with other pet parents, for example, or kind of like, yeah, that they're part of that community and part of that group, and maybe not so isolated in their kind of concerns or wants or desires or issues, or, you know, maybe just to share experiences, that kind of thing. And then psychological is a bit deeper in terms of like, how do you kind of make them feel seen or heard? And that kind of goes back to like resonance in a way. It's like those desires and worries. What kind of value can you offer your audience that has kind of that psychological impact with them? And then when it comes to kind of like relatability, this is more where you can learn about your audience, especially if you've got an established social media following. This will be slightly easier for you in that you can do some light stalking. Like, you don't need to go too deep into it, but you can maybe kind of scope out things like, if you're doing some competitor research, for example, and they have like a very similar audience to you, what you can do is look at the reviews, or look at kind of the interactions on their social media, look at what kind of questions pop up, look at what kind of like comments they make about the brand, like, you know, if they had a photo shoot with a brand, for example, what did they really value about the experience? What did they really appreciate? That will just kind of give you an indication as to what your audience values actually are. And if you can talk to those in your own brand positioning and marketing, then that is just, again, going to help with your relevance. And also kind of personalizing your communication with them. So this is more kind of getting into the email marketing side of things, where you can actually personalize that communication. Less so with social media, because it is kind of just like a post to your general public type of thing. But with email marketing, for example, you can do things like learn more about the demographics, include their first name in your communication, but also do things like when they're signing up to your newsletter, for example, you can kind of separate them into camps, like to kind of make it a bit more relevant for you guys. It might be a camp of like, I've got a puppy that I want you to take photos of, versus I've got a senior dog I want you to take photos of. And you can actually separate those groups and then send the group with puppies content that is relevant to that, where they are at that life stage, versus someone who's got an older dog, where the communication and relationship you establish with them might be slightly different based on that. So that's what I mean, kind of more about personalizing the communication and making it feel more like a one-to-one conversation with them, rather than just kind of like a general scattergun type of communication. And then also kind of the social proof, that's really something that does kind of assist with the 3 R's of resonance, relevance, and relatability. If you've got social proof, and if you've got, maybe not at this point, but if you are in this process, able to kind of gather testimonials and like behind the scenes and like, you know, kind of reviews online and things like that, or like getting tagged by other accounts that you're kind of legit and like you're trustworthy and that you do a great job and you're lots of fun, that again can just help you to feel a bit more accessible and a little bit more relatable. And that's what I mean by that. So hopefully that's all clear, but again, kind of feel free to pop any questions if you do. So yeah, throwing lots of info at you, I understand. Cool. Okay, so kind of leading on from that, like that's more kind of thinking about the strategy behind it. So like thinking about what is going to resonate with your audience, what is going to be relevant, what is going to relate to them, because that is, again, something that is going to increase your memorability as a brand. If you kind of hit those 3 R's, that is going to help you to ultimately be something like, maybe they're kind of scoping out a few photographers in the field to like whatever project they have in mind. But if you have kind of content and free resources and things like that on your website and through your social media, for example, that is the thing that people are going to come back to, like if they feel that deeper connection, because you have hit those 3 R's. So the 4th pillar that we then talk about is assets. And something as an agency that we really do stand for is that you have to be value driven and purpose led in all of your communication and everything you're offering to your audience. So kind of like what I mean by that is that you're not just kind of like post on social media, you're not just sending like marketing emails out for the sake of selling. It has that greater purpose behind it than simply trying to make money. And that's what I was kind of talking about earlier in terms of like, what are the 4 types of value can you offer them, whether it's functional, financial, social, and psychological. You can ensure that the content that you are creating for your marketing materials are kind of value driven and purpose led, by ensuring that they do include one of those 4, or a combo of those 4 types of value. So yeah, everything needs to have a purpose beyond trying to sell. And it is, again, leading through this relationship of you're essentially dating your customer. Like they have to get to know you, you have to get to know them. It's no point kind of like trying to jump into marriage straight away and like for them to be like landing on your website and be like, book in now, like buy this package, blah, blah, blah. It's like, you know, the first step might have to be kind of like a consultation call, or maybe the first step is even kind of further forward than that. Maybe it's just like download this free guide of things that you need to ask a photographer or something like that, you know, something that makes them feel kind of like empowered by their decision to kind of interact with you, like they are kind of gaining something, and you haven't even really kind of asked for any of their money by this stage. You're just ultimately wanting to create that instant connection with them and show that you do understand what they want and they need from you on that deeper level. So if you've looked into anything to do with marketing before, you might have heard of AIDA, and that is awareness, interest, desire, and action. And it's kind of like a funnel, if you've seen it online at all. And that's what I kind of mean by the dating your customer journey, is that you kind of move through these stages of them being aware of you, them being interested in you, them then desiring to work with you, and then them ultimately taking that action of like booking in for a photo shoot with you. So in marketing, in the world of marketing, that's the funnel that you're ultimately bringing people through. And when it comes to things like actual kind of like paid advertising, you might find like you can generate a lot of awareness, but then kind of the pool of people grows smaller each time. So don't be surprised by that if you do get into kind of like paid marketing routes. But I think for the purposes of this pillar, it's more kind of creating the assets to talk to each part of that journey that they're going on with you. So, you know, what do you need to say to them when they're first becoming aware of your brand? What do you need to say to them to develop that interest in your brand? What then do you need to say to them to increase the desire in your brand? And then what do you need to do to them? Because by this point, they should have been primed to then take that action with you. What do you need to say for them to be like, bang, yes, I've made my decision. I'm ready to kind of sign on and purchase your service. So, and it really comes back to, again, kind of those 3 R's. That's why I kind of like nurture and assets, again, kind of work hand in hand of like, how do you resonate with your audience? How can you be relevant? How can you be relatable? And again, this isn't something that you're going to kind of like knock out the park on your first try. It might be like you have to test different ways to approach this. And it might mean you create different lead magnets for your website. You might use different styles of messaging on your social media. So again, it's not to say kind of like what it's one way or the highway. You do have to like learn about your audience as you're bringing them through. But we did our own survey last year with Australian pet parents. And one statistic that was really interesting that came out of that was that 43% of pet parents felt pigeonholed or stereotyped by pet businesses. So it kind of harks back to what I was talking about before in terms of like a lot of what pet brands do and are slowly learning that they shouldn't be doing is talking to their audience like they're one and the same. Like there's some kind of like faceless mass that all have the same kind of like concerns about their pets or desires for their pets. So the more that you can kind of personalize a person's experience with your brand, the more compelling and emotional and effective it's ultimately going to be. And I think in terms of how you can kind of personalize that relationship, it is email marketing at this stage is the easiest medium, at least, to personalize that relationship in terms of understanding exactly what kind of demographics they fall into and what kind of like their personal kind of desires are. But it is possible. So when you are creating assets for your business, whether that is kind of like something that people have to sign up for your newsletter to receive, like whether it's like a PDF or a lead magnet of some kind, or if it's just going to be free value that you offer on your website, like blogs and guides and things like that, or maybe like little how-to video series and things like that. Just don't take kind of like that generalized approach. Really kind of do your homework on your audience where possible. And as I say, kind of like looking at competitors, looking at related brands, just really kind of digging into what is available online, whether it is kind of reviews or comments on social media posts or Reddit, like, you know, kind of chat rooms, and seeing what kind of language people use, and then kind of really going off that and like integrating that into the assets you're creating to support your brand visibility and awareness. I think that is yeah, so powerful.
I was actually going to say like that researching your audience and your ideal clients and the people that you want to work with is so important to figure out what they need, because one thing or one maybe mistake that I see a lot of pet photographers making on social media is like that they follow a ton of other pet photographers and interact with them almost exclusively, and other pet photographers are not your clients. Probably they are other pet photographers. They're not going to be the ones booking photography services with you. I follow a lot of pet photographers because I'm wanting pet photographers to use my services. But then also things like I see pet photographers who do like, here's an editing tutorial, here's how to set the white balance. And I would wonder if that is something that a pet photographer would be interested in compared to things that they are worried about in terms of booking a photo shoot with a photographer, or what they should wear to a photo shoot, or how to prepare their dog for a photo shoot. So really thinking about like not what questions you have or have had as a pet photographer, but what questions and concerns and dreams and desires your client who is going to reach out and book you has, and sticking in that mindset and doing that research from them, not to other pet photographers necessarily.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like, yeah, your customer always has to come first in terms of what is going to hit those 3 R's and what type of value can you be offering at each point, not just putting, you know, like putting out a social media post which is just like a fun quote. That's not wasted effort if it kind of like has that social and psychological value attached to it. So I'm not saying that everything needs to be like super intense and serious and like protracted, if that makes sense. It can be something that is literally just fun, but makes like draws your community in and makes them feel seen and included and like, oh, they get me kind of thing, you know. And that can be the power of like social media. But when it comes to maybe things like, yeah, I need a way to gather kind of a newsletter signups so that I can then take them on this nurture journey and I can kind of tell them more about my brand through emails. That might mean you do need to produce some kind of incentive for them to give you those details, because I don't think probably I haven't landed on any kind of business website in the past like 3 years and there hasn't been something in place like get a 10% discount if you sign up, get this free ebook if you sign up. Like if you look at most websites, they will have something in place, because a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to kind of sign up to one more newsletter, you know. So there is that kind of
Pop-ups are like, subscribe to my newsletter for updates. And everyone's like, no, I'm
why
not.
would you care? Why would you care? Like if somebody asked you to be like, oh yeah, sign up for updates about me, like you're gonna be like, yeah, no, I'm not gonna do that. But it's like, oh yeah, sign up for like this kind of PDF of like a checklist of enrichment games you can do with your dog to make them feel kind of more relaxed, or, you know, something like that. You can immediately be like, I'm gonna get some value out of like giving you my kind of my name and email address. So it's kind of about the energy exchange at that point. So the assets that you provide are going to be kind of like staggered in terms of like absolutely free, anyone can access them, blogs, social media posts, things like that. And then there's going to be the gated assets that you're like, okay, now I need to kind of get them across that line of at least getting their name and email address or whatever. And that is going to be more valuable than the content that you produce that is free facing, if that makes sense. So it's about understanding kind of how you're going to tier those assets then. But the great thing about producing gated content is that you can repurpose it. So kind of my recommendation is like you do put a lot of effort into creating some kind of incentive for people to sign up for your newsletter list when you get to that point. But then don't be afraid to like chunk it down and use it across your website, use it across your socials, use it on like videos, like if you do YouTube and lives and things like that, because the chances are people need to see it kind of several times in order to be able to absorb that value anyway. And some people respond better to written kind of content versus video, and some people respond better to visual content than written. And, you know, so if you take an asset, you can then kind of create it in multiple forms and have it in multiple places, just so you're getting the most bang for your buck, ultimately, whatever you're creating. So first understand, like Emily was saying, what kind of those questions or desires that your audience is experiencing, and kind of work backwards from that and being like, okay, they have this question, I can provide this solution, and I can provide this solution in that form. I can do a PDF, I can do an infographic, I can do like a short video on my Instagram. You know, you can do it in multiple ways, so kind of no asset is wasted, and it can be free facing, but you can also create this gated community where maybe it is a bit more developed when they kind of give you their email and first name, etc. So it's just about being kind of clever how you create assets, and yeah, repurposing them as much as you can and doing them to death, basically, because people aren't going to be tracking that anyway. So
honestly,
yeah, use something, 6 weeks later, use it again. Absolutely no harm in that. So you're going to get a lot of kind of output for your input.
I was going to say, like, the number of times I get asked what camera I use, but also what camera somebody should buy for beginners. I have 2 blog posts on it. I have about 10,000 videos on it. I'm putting together a PDF lead magnet on best cameras for beginners, because I know it's going to, like, people are going to sign up to my mailing list for this, because it is a question that comes up again and again. But like, you have to, sorry, I don't want to take over from you, Erin, but like, you
No,
start
please
things
do.
that I do, and I think it's like useful to hear stories of how stuff kind of goes. But like, you have to have a connection with people that they are asking you questions. Like, I think another thing I see people is they'll put a post up with a little caption and then they just kind of leave it. But you have to be interacting with people enough that they're going to ask you questions, that you can start noticing the questions they're asking you, so that you can then answer those questions with your lead magnet, and it can kind of go in a little bit of a cycle. So
yeah, I think I was just like, as you were talking as well, I don't know if it's worth mentioning kind of like, you know, SEO can be quite helpful in terms of like, if you're doing work on that for your website. There's a website, I think it's called like Answer the Public. It's either Ask or Answer the Public. I never go right on the first try. I think it's Answer the Public. Maybe just yeah, it's Answer the Public, where essentially what you can do with that website is type in like a topic, or you can type in, I think, like a brand if you want to, and essentially then it'll just like it'll just like spit out like a lot of questions that people ask in relation to whatever that phrase is. So you type in maybe like, I don't know, like dog, and it will like just spit out loads of questions about like what to feed a dog, how to train a dog, how do I know when my dog is sleepy, how do I know when my dog is happy, you know, like lots of different questions. And these are all kind of based on like kind of SEO algorithms and what people are actively searching for. So if you're kind of at the position where you're like, I don't have an audience, I don't know where to start, like I don't know what questions people are asking, kind of look to those tools, look towards maybe SEO tools to kind of get you started, whether that's things like Answer the Public, or like Google Keyword Planner as well as another one to see what people are searching for. And there's another one that I quite like, it's called Uber Suggest, that only kind of gives you a limited number of searches per day, but it's quite good in terms of showing you what's kind of popular, etc. So if you're like, I literally have no idea what kind of my audience are asking for, that again is another good place to start, because then you can at least know what people are searching for and are actively interested in. But I won't get into too much in SEO, because again, that's not my forte, and I find SEO quite dry. So
we had a whole guest speaker
amazing
last year as well. So there is a video on SEO from Mirella, who's like, her whole job is SEO and everything. So if you guys need SEO tips, you can find her video as well.
Oh, absolutely no shade on the people who are SEO specialists, but I'm just like, my brain just does not work that way. It's not as analytical. So that's cool that you've got that resource there. But yeah, and then kind of leading on to the third pillar of the sign up process, and that's partnerships. And that is really about kind of raising your profile and raising your visibility as a brand, which I know like a lot of people struggle with. And, you know, kind of the landscape in terms of like paid advertising, both like for social media and Google kind of ads, it is getting more saturated and it is getting more competitive. So how do you market if you have like little to no budget? And partnerships can actually be a very powerful way to increase your brand visibility by almost kind of leveraging audiences that have already been established by other brands. They've done all the kind of the legwork of creating a community that you want to tap into. And in a nutshell, if you're able to find a partner, you've really thought about kind of the wants and needs of your audience, and you're like, they have all these desires for their pet, they have all these worries, and they have all these dreams, and you're like, okay, like I've done that homework and I've gone digging to that depth, but I actually realize, you know, maybe my product or service can't fulfill all those wants and needs. Then you are going to be knocking it out the park if you can then partner with someone who can help you to plug those gaps. So you might be able to provide like one solution, but you might be able to partner with someone who can provide a related additional solution. So you're not just then kind of limiting yourself to, I can only take photos of pets, that's all I can offer people. You then bring a partner in to be like, I can do this service, but they can also provide this additional value without the hassle of people having to, like, pet parents having to go out and find it themselves. Like, a very easy example for kind of pet photography, for example, is like maybe putting together like a goodie bag bundle where they get a voucher to a local groomers, if they get a voucher to a pet apparel like store, or they get a voucher to some like dog treats, you know, related things that maybe you can't provide personally, but just make that relationship with the customer more enriched, and you're offering a more kind of comprehensive solution or service to them. So again, kind of like with partnerships, it's not something that you might kind of like immediately dive into and be like, yeah, I can secure really like high profile, lucrative partnerships, because it has to be an equal exchange of energy at the end of the day. Like, you can't be approaching a huge name and be like, expect them ultimately to partner with you if they're not going to get anything out of it themselves. And I'm not saying that you need to have like a huge social media following in order to be able to approach a potential partner, because you can bring something different to the table, you can help them in different ways. But I think starting kind of smaller and then kind of building up is probably the best way to go in terms of partnerships, and identifying who is most likely to be responsive to, if I reach out to this person, who is more likely going to want to help each other out, versus someone who's just going to, you know, kind of blatantly, it's going to be like a tumbleweed moment and you're going to get no response. And actually in the process of this, we do say, you know, like, you have to list maybe about 100 partners and kind of just work through them, because, you know, the percentage of people who are going to be responsive to a partnership might be quite small, but the more that you're able to kind of get yourself out there and reaching out to other brands to set up potential partnerships, you're already doing a lot to increase your brand visibility. Even if a partnership doesn't actually emerge from it, you're already trying to like get your name out there and showing that you're active and you're dynamic, and there is that potential to collaborate, maybe not now, but, you know, in the future too. So when it comes to actually identifying partners who you would like to set up a collaboration with, there's kind of 3 principles that we tell you to keep in mind when actually being like, do I want to work with this person or not? So the first one is, make sure that they actually have the same audience as you, or an audience that you want to target, but that they're not in direct competition with you, because there's ultimately no point. If you're in direct competition, there's no point reaching out to those people, and they're going to say no. The second principle, like I said before, is like, you need to make sure there's an equal energy exchange involved. Otherwise, you might end up kind of giving a lot more to the partner and becoming resentful, or they might be giving a lot more to you and becoming resentful, and that's when the partnership just deteriorates ultimately. And then the third principle is, make sure that your ethics and values align, because the worst thing that you can probably do is partner with someone and then find out down the line that you've essentially endorsed a brand that massively goes against your kind of personal ethos or values as a brand. Like, kind of like an example off the top of my head is like, you find out down the line that they endorse some kind of like shock collar or like aversive training tactic, and you're like, oh my god, like, my brand stands for like wholesomeness and loving your pets and nurturing them and positive reinforcement, and I've essentially just endorsed a brand that is like, shows some kind of level of cruelty to animals. So, you know, kind of making sure that you do your homework on them first, and if they're kind of worth their salt, they should have this information visible on their website or their social media. So again, it might just take some like light stalking online to kind of get a sense for kind of what their values and ethics are. But yeah, just do your homework on that brand. And yeah, so kind of like, I thought it'd be helpful as well to kind of like share some ideas for the type of partnerships that you can establish, especially if you're kind of in the process of just getting going and you're just wanted to kind of get the ball rolling, but not do anything that is like very big or is going to like be a huge financial stake. So kind of one of the things is like, promote their product to your audience, whether that's via like your socials or your newsletter. Feature their brand on your website and social media, can be as simple as that. Invite them onto your YouTube channel or a podcast if you have one, or you know, like a social media live, just do like a shared video together. Host a combined competition or giveaway across your channels where they get like maybe part of your service and part of their product is included. Or it could be something like write an article or blog for their website that has your branding and your name attached to it. So you're getting that brand visibility. Or again, kind of create maybe some posts or video content that can be used on their socials. So they don't actually have to do any legwork, but you're like, hey, look at this cool content that I've produced for you, like that you can just use. Or you can produce like a free PDF or ebook that is just for their audience, but again, kind of has your branding splashed all over it. Or it could be, if you've got to the point where you do have quite a few kind of key industry contacts, it might be like, I can introduce you to people within this field that you might be interested in talking to. So you can see kind of like actually partnerships doesn't have to be like discounts and money and things like that all the time. It can be a bit more kind of like outside the box and creative thinking than that. So don't feel kind of shoehorned into it always being like financially driven, but as long as it does have that equal exchange of energy, I think that is probably one of the most important things of any negotiation when it comes to partnerships. But yeah, so that's just like a very kind of high level overview, but again, hopefully that all makes sense. And those are the 5 pillars.
Hey, awesome. Do you have any questions, guys, about all of that?
And if you can hear rustling, it's because my cat is now rubbing against my microphone. So
Now I'm listening for the rustling. I'm like, I want to hear the cat.
I don't know if you can actually hear. Are you purring? She might walk across the camera in a minute. You might see a tail.
Good.
I hope it happens. It was always great when it does happen. I love it.
Any questions, guys, about any of the pillars or anything we talked about? Aha, I see.
Here comes the tail.
Can I talk as opposed to typing?
Yeah, for sure.
So how much time would you sort of spend on each of these pillars? I can understand that some might be more than others, but sort of a, you know, because it to me, it could sound like it could get quite time consuming, and then you might, you know, you're trying to do one thing, but you got all of this other stuff that you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, for sure.
I think going, right?
In terms of kind of priority, I think kind of working through them in sequence is always going to be more effective than trying to necessarily like jump between the pillars personally, all at once. And I know a lot of people kind of have like these businesses as like side hustles at the moment, or they've got other jobs that they need to like, or responsibilities they need to hold down. So I'm not saying that you need to work on this like for a full working day, 5 days a week. I'd say probably if you can work on this, at least dedicate like 1 day maybe per week working on each of these 5 pillars, then at least that's going to be progress over perfection. So, you know, just kind of getting it done, just chipping away at it. And you'll find that some things might be a little quicker to work through than others. So as long as you're dedicating some time on a regular basis to developing each of these 5 areas and working through them sequentially, I think that is probably going to be the most accessible and feasible way for you to work through them. Does that help? Yeah, cool.
Do you think it's like kind of a, because I would imagine for me to like imagine the pillars less of like pillars and more of like a repeating circle, because I feel like even once you have some assets, then you're like kind of going back through and maybe you're like tweaking your story, you're tweaking your messaging. Like I know for me, the messaging that I had for the very first learning community launch versus the last one where I really got clear on who I was talking to. And I think in the next opening, it's going to be tweaked again because I want to shift focus a little bit. Like this stuff kind of comes and goes in circles. So I feel like it's like an ongoing, you kind of get it to a point that it's good and you're like, right, this can go out in the world. I'll deal with it again later, come back to it when I've come back around.
Yeah, and I think some things you're not going to know that they work unless you get them out into the world too, because like story and identity, obviously, like I said, is a little bit about like me kind of to a degree, whereas kind of nurture assets and partnerships are more like how do you get your business out into the world. So I think especially when it comes to like, okay, like identity, I think I need to position my brand in this way and take the customer on this specific journey. But when you actually start to think of like the nurture strategy and the assets you need to produce from that and getting it out into the world, and you're like, okay, that's really landing with the audience, or actually no, I'm still getting crickets from that, I need to tweak my approach. It's all about kind of testing and refining. So that's why we encourage split testing a lot in terms of like the email marketing we do with our clients, because with the kind of statistic that I shared earlier in terms of like 43% of pet parents feeling stereotyped or pigeonholed, like we're all guilty of it. You kind of make assumptions about your audience. You think you know them, but actually they might surprise you. They might have different values or different views. So, but you're not going to know that until you get out there and start kind of communicating and connecting with this audience and getting that active feedback from them. So I think it was a really good thing at the beginning of this chat to be like, oh, I'm procrastinating. I need to get going. Like I just keep on putting it off. And it's like, yeah, because there's that fear involved. But as soon as you get going and you start doing it, like you don't feel that fear anymore, because you're just more interested in the feedback and, you know, developing and evolving and refining. That comes like your core focus. So I think it's like Brene Brown is like, wasn't it, the quote is like, is it her who does like feel the fear and do it anyway kind of attitude, whether it's Brene Brown or not. But, you know, I think it's, yeah, just taking that energy, and rather than kind of feeling like it's something that is holding you back, it's just harnessing that energy and being like, I'm just so excited to like explore and investigate and be curious about this community and this audience and how my brand can develop, and maybe kind of just reposition it in your mind in that way.
Yeah, I think you're right. You really have to put it out there to be able to start working on some of the other things and start refining and start creating, because you don't know what your audience resonates with until you're building that audience based on your branding and your messaging and your story and your identity. And if you're like, wow, they are not responding to this at all, I need to maybe make a little bit of shift, or I need to be clearer in how I'm talking to them and sharing that story, because they are not getting it. But you won't know they're not getting it, or if they are resonating with it, until you're putting it out there and then analyzing what's coming back from that.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think, yeah, like just get things started, guys. And like, I know for sure for me, like the last opening of the learning journey, I really made a focus of like, if you're a pet parent, you're trying to create the photos you're imagining and you just can't make them come out right, was like a big kind of like, not catchphrase, but that was like the message. And then from a bunch of you guys who joined in the last opening, it felt like that really resonated. They're like, you guys were like, that was exactly like, I've got this pet and I've really been trying to take these photos and they just never turned out right. So for me, that was this feedback that message and that story and like the things that I'd been creating and the copy that I'd been making to address that problem had been resonating. And, you know, you have to put it out there to be able to know that.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry to take over again.
No, it's fine. Yeah, it's really good, because obviously with this kind of like, I suppose the Q&A section of the chat, it's just really finding out about kind of like, I suppose, yeah, what is the thought process? What are the barriers you feel like are in your way at the moment? And sometimes it might be just a simple mindset shift, or it might be, oh no, I need to get extra support in a different way. And like, how do I get that support?
Even if you just want to be a small business, not looking to grow big.
Yeah.
Just got to get it out there, Susie. Just get it out there. And like,
oh yeah, that's the thing. It's like, if you just kind of like, you know, I don't need to, I'm older. I don't need to have, you know, I'm not looking, this isn't going to be my livelihood. It's just, I would like to, you know, I don't want to call it a hobby anymore, right? Like sort of move it on, but then how much should I be putting in, knowing I want to keep it relatively small, but you still want to, you know, I don't want to sit around for months and months and I have one client, you know?
Yeah, I think it's, that's a really good point, actually. It's like, I think really sitting down and understanding what are those kind of targets for you personally. Do you want like X amount of clients per month? Do you want to make X amount of revenue per month? Like, how big do you actually want to grow this? Because if you're just creating a business where you're like, I just want kind of like good brand visibility, and I want like a steady stream of clients, but I don't necessarily want like my name to be in big flashing lights within this kind of this industry. I'm happy for it to stay kind of local and more intimate. Maybe you don't kind of like, your partnerships might change then, like maybe you do partnerships to a degree, but not to the degree you would if you did want to create more revenue for your business. So I think a big part of that is kind of understanding what that kind of those goals are. And then I think with things like when it comes to story, I think, to be honest, like story, identity, nurture, assets and partnerships are all still going to be relevant to you no matter what size you are, because I don't think you can have a cohesive business without them, to be honest. Like I don't think you're going to maybe get like a customer or two per month without them, but it's going to feel quite like a struggle, and it might feel like an uphill climb. Whereas if you've got these things actively working for you and maybe just like they're cogs that are just turning in the background, then you're naturally going to be attracting the audience that you desire, and they're just going to, again, kind of like they're going to feel that resonance with you, they're going to relate to you, and they're going to want to engage with you to a greater degree if somebody just kind of like stumbled across you online, you know, from like some errant link, if that makes sense. So I do think it's not necessarily something that you have to invest like thousands of like pounds or dollars in necessarily, but something that, again, that you can just chip away at in the background and just, yeah, you know, consistently plug away at, and you're still going to experience those results and that growth and, you know, kind of that evolution of your business naturally. So it's just whether kind of that time scale, whether you want to fast track it or you're happy to kind of work on it for a long period as well.
I wonder as well if like being really clear on your story, Susie, and your why, like why you're wanting to take these photos and why you're wanting to do what you want to do, is also going to put you in a place that's like, it's obvious that you don't want to be the most world famous photographer in the world. That's not what you're about. You're wanting to make a connection with these pet parents and create beautiful memories just for them, for, you know, I don't know, make it about exclusivity. Maybe that comes down to your ethics and the way you talk about what you do and the reason that you do what you do. You know, I think that can also it won't set you up to be like, I want to be the best photographer in Canada. You know, it's like, I want to work with pet parents who really love their pets and create, I don't know, like whatever the why is for you that you're doing, I think also sets you on a path for how big or how small you can be as well, I would think.
Mm-hmm. And often I think once you've got these like 5 pillars in place, maybe less so partnerships, but a lot of the time you've put all the things like the building blocks in place for people to kind of get to know, like, and trust you as a brand. And so then when it comes to maybe like a discovery call or a consultation call, whatever you want to call it, most people will then turn up being like, they've already decided they want to work with you. Like it doesn't then become like a pitch for your services, or like you're really having to struggling like to convince them about your worth, because you've already like displayed your worth. Like you've already displayed that you get what they want, you know them inside and out, you've used their language, they feel like that emotional connection to you, and they feel like they've got to know you on that personal level. Then they turn up to calls and they're like, I already know that I want to work with you, I just need to now kind of like nut out how exactly this is going to happen, what are the steps to make it reality. Because that was the thing I was going to say, like we found with that whole thing of like how much do you put yourself out there for your business, it was something that myself and Taryn with like Pet Biz Creatives, we personally struggled with it, because I'm not a person who kind of uses social media at all. Like I don't mind like seeing what my friends are up to, that kind of thing, but I don't really post all that frequently, to be honest, and neither did Taryn. It's like we'll share like pictures of our dogs and our cats and things like that, and we're much happier to hide behind our pets. But it was only as a business when we started to move away from that, and we started to maybe kind of jump on live videos and do YouTube things and like have our own podcast where people could hear our voices and hear our opinions about things and, you know, see what our values were. It's only when we kind of put ourselves out there in a way that kind of felt on our terms, but then felt quite like it was for our audience. It was kind of delivered in a way that we felt would be delivering the most value to them. People were kind of jumping on calls with us and they're like, yeah, you don't need to pitch to me. I know that I want to work with you, but I just need to now learn kind of what are the options, what are your packages, what are the services kind of involved. And we were like, oh, wow, we don't like, because, you know, like before that point, we were just going like, oh, the reason that you want to work with us is because of XYZ reason. And, you know, kind of like, you know, it's a different kind of energy. It felt, you know, kind of going as far as to say it felt like that stressed, kind of desperate, I need to get like sales, I need to kind of get clients on board, versus like, take us or leave us. You either kind of resonate with us, you like our values, you like how we work, or you don't. And if you don't, there's loads of other agencies out there that you can find. Go work with them. We don't care. We want to work with people who want to work with us, kind of thing. So, you know, kind of it just puts you in a different kind of mindset and a different energetic space, I think, as a business. If you kind of know who you are and you know what you stand for, and you don't have to then kind of like feel that desperation of that pitch to people, because you've already done the legwork, you've already kind of nurtured them, and you've already built that relationship.
Yep, agree. Monica said, do you recommend any methods that can get you started with creating and formulating the story?
Yeah, so the story, I think, is like a really interesting one, because it's kind of like, how do you tell your story? Like, where do you start with that? So I personally find it's quite a good process to really kind of like start with yourself, essentially. I think I mentioned it earlier. It's like, how did you get to this point? Like, what is your kind of personal journey? Yeah, like with pets in particular. Make sure it's relevant, of course. You don't want to be giving them your CV, but like, what are the kind of like, maybe what are the life events that kind of like developed the personal values in you that are now kind of embodied in your brand? Like, how does that impact what you do? And I think with storytelling, obviously having kind of like that beginning, middle and end structure is always going to be quite helpful. So if you kind of look on a lot of our story or like about us pages for websites, you'll find there is that kind of like, my first dog Skippy kind of like was the love of my life, and you know, kind of like we had all these amazing memories together. Like if I was taking like a dog food brand, for example, they might be like, but then he got sick and like the vets couldn't help him, and you know, so it's kind of like, and then it's like, I built this product to help with his digestive issues. So it's kind of like connecting the dots as to kind of like how your story or your relationship with pets then kind of relates to what you're doing as a business, if that makes sense. Because the whole point about kind of developing your story is to have that kind of personal connection and that insight into your background and your history, specifically with animals, if you're working within the pet industry. Because I think at the end of the day, people want to know that you're actually genuine and legitimate in your kind of your relationship and your understanding and your love of animals. Because as I said before, it's like the niche that you're working in and the industry that you're working in is, the relationship with pet parents is going to be completely different to any other industry. And that's because they're ultimately putting their kind of their trust and their belief in you as a brand, that you're going to show as much kind of love and care and dedication to their pet as they feel. So they kind of want to see that displayed in your personal story. So to go kind of like through that process of identifying like what is going to be relevant or what is not to your audience, it might be a case of you draft your story and you're kind of like, okay, these are my childhood memories, this is how kind of my relationship evolved over time, this is kind of maybe like a job I had and I realized actually my true passion was working with pets, and this is how kind of like my life evolved to this point. Because I don't think most people have been like, as a kid, like, I know what I'm going to be when I'm older, I'm going to like take photos of animals. Like, that's not a common story. So people do like to see kind of like maybe the highs and lows, the challenges, the obstacles that you've actually overcome personally to get to this point. And I think it's just giving people a little bit of context, a little bit of history as to, again, how you reached that point, if that helps. And like I said, you might get to a point of doing a first draft and you're like, actually, those points aren't relevant, I don't really need to talk about that. And you'll just pick the highlights. But, you know, it's really about just kind of connecting the dots about the evolution.
Do you think it's worth making sure that that is still linked back to the experience they'll have with you? Because I think sometimes on websites, people can get a little bit like, rambly about their life story. And I'm like, I don't care. I just want to know how your product like benefits me essentially. But I want to know enough about you that I can trust that you know what you're doing because of your story. But I don't want to know that, I don't know, you know, like that you went on
you went on
for
like
5 years, it's unrelated or whatever, you know, like I want to know how your experience are going to benefit me, because at the end of the day, we're all very selfish and we're out for ourselves. How important do you think that that is to keep linking back to their benefit?
I think it is important. I think sometimes businesses do it to a degree though, where it's obviously like another pitch, to be honest. Like it does feel kind of like, I'm just going to shoehorn this in so I can go back to pitching my service to you. And I think the kind of about us pages, or the our stories that really kind of do have the most impact, it is about kind of like really showcasing those values and the ethics that drive the business at the end of the day, and those should naturally be connected to a conversation about what you're offering. Or we've got another audience member who's joined us.
I'm so sleepy. He did agility today and he's just been fast. Just look at his little sleepy face.
It's so cute. Oh, I just love it. I love it. We've got
Bye.
another. This is what I love about working in the pet industry though, because it's like animals can just walk across like your Zoom and you're like, yeah, perfect, give me more. Whereas like with other clients, we always used to be, I'm so sorry about my dog barking in the background and things like that. Yeah, so it's lovely. But one thing I did actually want to share with you, and I'm just going to drop a link in the chat. It's a brand called like Brand True North, and they have like storytelling archetypes which might help in terms of like understanding the structure of the different stories you can tell about yourself and your brand. And a lot of them might not be relevant to you as an individual, but it kind of, once you start to see these archetypes, you start to notice them more and more in different kind of brand stories. And like about us pages, you'll be like, oh yeah, that's the mastery, for example, where people have worked X amount of years in their industry and they've now created some like revolutionary solution because they're such a brainiac in their field. Or you know, what the discovery, which is a common one I think with, you know, especially with pet products, is like, I had this need for my pet but I couldn't find a solution, so you know what, I went ahead and created one, that kind of thing. It's like a very kind of common pattern you see in how stories are delivered. That's not to say that you need to feel the need to hit this kind of structure, you know, kind of like by the book. But for example, one of the archetypes is called the customer's shoes, and that might be more relevant to how you deliver your story to your audience in having a need, you know, couldn't find a solution, so I created one, that kind of thing. So yeah, maybe just take a look at that, and that might kind of give you some inspiration as well.
Another puppy on the Zoom. Awesome. That was really, really interesting. I hope you guys got some puppies.
Love it.
Lisa, we're getting distracted. We can't handle it. I hope you guys have like a bit of a structure maybe to help you kind of moving forward with getting your businesses started, and you know, things that you can start working on wherever you are, whether you already have your website and everything launched. I think you have some next steps, and of course, if you want more, Erin and the Pet Biz Creatives are here and they are amazing. And like, honestly, I owe my branding and launching and so much of the initial success to these guys. So, and I'm not getting paid to say it.
Oh no, I was going to say, I was like, I'll slip you some money afterwards.
There's no affiliate links or anything here. It's just like, yeah, the first several months was all set up with them. And, you know, even just moving forward, once it was launched, right, what do we do next? What do we need to set up? What are we doing with lead magnets? What are we doing for blogs? Like all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, they are great.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, I was just going to say, like, if you are in the like process of getting started and you're like, oh, I feel quite overwhelmed by how much needs to be done, like here, one thing that you could do is maybe like look at your favorite brands, whether they are kind of pet brands or not, and maybe start to like look at maybe how they've done the 5 pillars, how they've kind of executed it on their website and their social media and things like that. Because once you start to actively look for these things in brands, you're like, oh, I can see how they've done their story. Oh, I can see how they're nurturing me with this language, or like how they're kind of feeding me through a funnel, or oh, look at that partnership, that's interesting. So maybe just like actively start to dissect some of your like favorite brands, and that might give you some ideas for what you can do with your own website and your own business too.
it was interesting because as we were going through it, I was like, oh yeah, that's where I'm doing that. Oh, partnerships, not doing that very well. Okay.
Yeah. Again, it's like you're not going to be able to do all 5 at once, as I was saying earlier, and you're not always going to be able to do all 5 100% at the same time. So don't beat yourself up if, you know, maybe one pillar is underdeveloped in comparison to another, because that's just naturally how the cycle is going to go. But like you said earlier, Emily, it's kind of cyclical in that, like, you will get to partnerships, but then you might go back to story, you know, blah, blah, blah.
Would it be helpful for you guys if I maybe did a little breakdown of what my kind of pillars sort of are that I've been implementing? Because like I've been running this for 2 years now, I have a lot of this stuff set up. And like I said, as we're talking through, I was like, oh, yep, assets. We've got this happening right now. The quick critiques is a big asset that I've just put out, this massive sign up thing. You know, like all the branding that I did, the colors that I chose, the ways that I've been building the sales pages, like everything has been developed from the past 2 years of seeing what works and what doesn't work and what's resonating and what isn't and everything. So, okay. Examples always help. All right. I will try and put something together for you guys on what I've been doing.
And if like you had any kind of questions pop into your head, like after this call, as Emily said, like I'm happy for her to fling them my way afterwards. So if you've got anything that outstanding, I can always like get back to Emily and respond to any questions you have after the fact.
Awesome. I'm just writing myself a note so I won't forget to do that. All right, cool. Thank you so much, Erin. Sorry you've been here for ages.
No, it's been great. I hope people haven't been like sick of the sound of my voice by the end of it.
No, I've been seeing everybody's been writing notes. There's been lots of like busy pens over there. So I think everybody's got like heaps and heaps of stuff. So yeah, I think it's
really perfect. Love it, Selena.
Pages. I love it, but I will be posting this up, and Erin, maybe I can send you the recording too if that is helpful for you as well.
Love it. Yeah.
And yeah, if any questions come through after the fact, I will let you know. Otherwise, as always, I super appreciate you coming on and talking with us all about marketing, business and branding and all that cool stuff. And I hope that some of you guys are like, right, we're going to get this done. We're going to make progress. It's going to happen.
Oh no, it's been great talking with you. I love this community as well. I think it's such a cool group of people each time. So thank you for inviting me on.
No worries. We always love having you. So I'll have to convince you to come back again.
It won't take much twisting of my arm, that's for sure.
Oh, actually, you guys are all going to be able to see me and Erin have another chat because I'm posting up an interview I did for Erin. So we're roles reversed, talking about product photography that had not been scheduled until recently, until we did this interview. And I was like, yeah, I'll put it up in business month. So that is coming out in March as well, talking all about how you can make money from taking photos of products and why I have literally 50 dog beds in my house right now. So
and it's a great example of a partnership in action, hey?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erin.
No worries. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.